Good evening to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our tropical weather outlook for September 23rd, 2025. Today we are going over Major Hurricane Gabrielle, which has become a Category 4 hurricane, and it is still persisting as a major hurricane today. But we're also going to be focusing a lot more today on two new areas of invests in the Atlantic that we are now tracking, 94L and 93L. And both of these areas might actually be worth watching, especially when it comes to impacts in the Atlantic Basin, especially for those along the East Coast. And I'll go over which one and when and the models and what they are generally showing for today. So lots to go over and lots to talk about for today's update. So glad to have you here. Let's get started by looking at the National Hurricane Center homepage to see what we are tracking right now. Obviously, starting off with Hurricane Gabrielle, Major Hurricane Gabrielle, maximum sustained winds at 130 miles per hour. This rapidly strengthened over the weekend or starting around Sunday evening, especially into yesterday, rapidly strengthened and became a major hurricane and strengthened even further than that to a Category 4 hurricane. But it is now beginning to weaken, but this is going to pose a threat to the Azores, a place that you don't hear about often, but I'll show you with the track in a little bit. Hurricane watches are now in effect for the Azores. So even though Gabrielle will not be making a landfall, let's say along the East Coast or even in Canada, there will still be impacts brought to some landmass or some area of the world where there is some kind of population. So remember that with Gabrielle, and again, I'll show you the watches and warnings with the track map in just a little bit. But areas where we will actually need to watch for potential development, especially in terms of development that might actually, hit closer to home and directly impact us. And by us, I mean those especially along the East Coast. I'm definitely along the East Coast. We do have two areas of interest to track. Both of them actually have pretty decent areas, and surprisingly, it is now looking like both of these areas might actually form. First of all, with 93L, this is the area that is more likely to form right now in the shorter term, with a chance of development at 90% in the next 7 days and within the next 48 hours at a moderate chance. But the more interesting area of interest here, this one closer to the Bahamas. And as I'll show you with the models in a little bit, this is the one that I actually think we're going to have to keep a close eye on, especially if you're in the Bahamas and if you're along the East Coast, stretching honestly anywhere from Florida to the Outer Banks and even honestly into the Northeast and New England. You'll want to keep a very close eye on 94L. And right now, that has a 60% chance of development in the next 7 days. And then really quickly before we get on to the latest on Gabrielle with the satellite, I want to show you Hurricane Narda, officially now a hurricane, yet another hurricane here in the Pacific. Maximum sustained winds at 85 miles per hour with a minimum central pressure of 981 millibars. Let's get on to Hurricane Gabrielle, though, with the latest satellite image right now, of course, using tropical tidbits. And you can see definitely a major hurricane has a clear eye, has a CDO of some sort, so, makes sense that it is a major hurricane, although the eye is beginning to cloud in a little bit on recent frames. So it's likely past its peak, and it's now beginning to kind of ride along the jet stream here, which is what actually kind of helped intensify this with, help of a jet interaction, which is kind of like a drug for these hurricanes. It helps them rapidly intensify quite a bit. And obviously, it definitely helped in the case of Gabrielle, getting the storm to a Category 4 intensity. But this is now probably beginning to weaken. But as I said before, this will pose a threat to the Azores, especially as we head into the end of the week. And there are now hurricane watches in effect for the entirety of the Azores Islands, as Gabrielle will pass through there, especially on the northern end of the Azores Islands, as we head into Friday. But I'd imagine so that by the time we get to the end of the week, uh, Gabrielle will probably have expanded in size enough that impacts will probably be felt throughout the entire Azores island chain. So if you're in the Azores, please keep an eye out or for Gabrielle. And then beyond that, eventually, as this heads further off into the northeast, this will eventually become a post-tropical system as we head towards the end of the week into the weekend, and probably bring quite a bit of impacts to Europe. And this might be a post-tropical system by then, but there's definitely been instances in the past of powerful ex-hurricanes and ex-tropical cyclones being very potent to Europe, and that's going to be for Spain and Portugal. So if you're there, you might also want to keep an eye out on Gabrielle and monitor its progress as well throughout this week. And then really quickly, before we get to what is also going on throughout the rest of the Atlantic, want to show you what's happening in the Eastern Pacific, because we obviously have Hurricane Narda, again a Category 1, probably going to strengthen a little bit further, and I wouldn't be shocked if this becomes a major hurricane, although I think this might have a little bit of issues with shear over the next several days, but really doesn't look like it's battling with shear too much right now. You can kind of see we have these curling convective bands here in the eye wall of the storm, as you would typically see in a rapidly intensifying storm, as Narda is doing so right now, or at least it's trying to do so, but will remain a hurricane, probably will strengthen a little bit over the next several days. But good news is that this will remain well out to sea, no impacts, no direct impacts to the Mexican coastline, except, of course, for the typical rip currents and swells that we have from these hurricanes. And I mention those because swells and rip currents do have a hazard, especially for beachgoers, and they take lives, so keep in mind of that. But in terms of direct impacts, obviously we don't have any that will occur here in the Eastern Pacific. But shifting gears to the Atlantic, where we might actually have impacts, and talk about impacts shorter term, those especially in the islands will have to, kind of batten down the hatches a little bit, as we'll have the tropical wave right now, Invest 94L here, and then Invest 93L here in the Atlantic. But we're going to have the wave associated with Invest 94L move through the northern Caribbean islands. And then as we head into the end of the week, we're going to have to watch both waves for development. Again, this is Invest 93L, and right now the National Hurricane Center gives this wave a higher chance of developing in the next 48 hours to 7 days. But both have at least a higher than coin flip chance that eventually they will develop. And with 94L, I will say that 94L is an especially interesting wave that we're going to need to watch, because this will be much further west, much closer to our neck of the woods, and the models as well bring 94L very close to especially the East Coast. So we're going to have to watch this very closely. And just to give you an idea of how things are going for both of these waves right now, you can see the 850 millibar vorticity signature, and you can see both of these waves have pretty decent vorticity signatures, although 93L here further to the east definitely has a little bit more of a potent signature, and that kind of falls in line with the National Hurricane Center giving 93L a higher chance of development in the shorter term. But both of these areas still have a decent chance each of developing and becoming tropical systems, and certainly makes sense. And I've been saying this for a while. Just look at how warm the East Coast, well, the Atlantic in general, but even here along the southeast, very, very warm, very, very warm, especially just north of the Caribbean islands, where both of these areas are going to be, especially once again right along the East Coast and near the Bahamas, where we're especially going to monitor 94L. It was only a matter of time before these were going to manifest. The warm sea surface temperatures were once again going to manifest in more strong activity, especially for the peak of the hurricane season, which we obviously are in, for the date being September 22nd, at least on this map, but reality, it's September 23rd. NOAA Coral Reef Watch always tends to be a day behind. I don't know why, but it doesn't really matter. It's only one day, and in general, things are very warm, and even actual sea surface temperatures too. It's just rocket fuel consistently throughout the entire Atlantic here, especially north of the islands, deep in a sea of 29s, even some 30s here as we get towards the Bahamas. So bottom line, what I'm trying to point out to you is that there's lots of very, very strong rocket fuel for both of these areas to definitely develop. Sea surface temperatures will not be an issue. And as a result, you have models like the Google AI ensemble model, and as I'll show you as well, the European, but especially look here at the Google AI model. They have both of these systems becoming pretty strong, which is actually quite incredible because if you look at the distance that both of these waves have, they are pretty close to each other. But both of these systems develop, and both of them become pretty strong. So we might even have another 2 hurricanes here to add to the list in terms of development over the next several days. And it's not just the Google AI, it's also the European too. But look, especially here on the European, quite some interesting things happen. The European obviously also has both of these systems developing, and also have quite strong ensembles on both. But with the second wave here, which is closer to the East Coast, well, some of the European ensembles actually have this going into the East Coast. Some of these ensembles here literally have a head first dive right into the Carolinas coast, and you even see some hurricane ensembles in here. So pretty much meaning we're going to have to watch the tropics very, very closely over the next several days, especially for those along the East Coast. And the wave that is especially further closest to the East Coast here, 94L. But I will say, interest in Bermuda should also watch here with the wave further to the east, and that is 93L. But once again, both of them become very strong on both of the ensembles of the Google AI, especially the Google AI, pretty much making both of these major hurricanes. Definitely 93L here, further east in the Atlantic, a major hurricane. And then you could also see that play out on the operational Euro, which has come out for the 12Z. And I'll just show you here. They obviously have 93L developing first, and that happens by later this week. So probably by the end of the week, we'll definitely have another named storm to add onto the list, maybe even two. But 93L seems to develop here pretty quickly, and then passes very, very close to Bermuda. So again, those with 93L in Bermuda need to watch very closely. But then notice here, just off the East Coast, this is 94L. And 94L, I mean, I guess because of how close both of these storms are together, maybe some influence from 93L kind of also takes 94L out. So this doesn't, directly crash right into the East Coast. But I mean, just looking at the fact that this is developing in the Bahamas, automatically those along the East Coast, especially the Southeast, should have their guards up high for potential development. And it just kind of puts into perspective both the Google AI and the European, showing the development of both of these systems. And that'll definitely be a very interesting thing to see. And maybe Bermuda might actually be in the crossfires, at least if you were to believe the 12Z European model, for two systems over the next several weeks here. So we'll have to see what happens, but this is definitely a very, very interesting thing. And it's definitely much, much closer to land and much closer to our neck of the woods, especially for us here in the East Coast, Bahamas, and even Bermuda. So we're going to have to watch this very closely. But let's see what the GFS has for their 12Z run. And I would definitely be a little bit cautious about the GFS because it definitely doesn't have a very good handle on either of these systems. I mean, it does have 93L developing here, but it does something very weird where the energy from 94L ends up not developing, but then gets sucked into 93L, and then it just ends up becoming this very broad, big mess, which will also probably bring impacts to Bermuda, although, probably not be a very strong storm. So GFS does something a little bit weird. Not sure if I would really buy it, but I mean, they kind of have development as well, at least of one system. So if you were to ask me, I would probably say that it's almost for sure thing that at least one storm will probably come out of both of these areas. And I would definitely imagine that by the end of the week, we'll probably have our next tropical storm here in the Atlantic, which is Humberto, which is the next name on the list. Beyond that, we'll have to see what happens. It's certainly very interesting. Maybe we'll even have two storms by the end of the week with Humberto and Imelda if both of these areas develop. But there's still a lot of uncertainty right now, obviously, in terms of whether or not they'll develop, and of course where the tracks will happen, especially for 94L, which will be much closer to us and much further west. The track and where it develops and how strong it gets will especially matter for the second wave. And of course, we'll be monitoring both of these areas very, very much so, and very closely throughout this upcoming week, throughout the entire week. So obviously, if you are new to my channel and you want more information on both of these waves, I would really recommend that you take the time right now, subscribe, like, and make sure to turn on the notification too, so you can get videos and live streams, because we'll probably be doing some live streams eventually, the moment I upload them and the moment I go live. So please make sure to do that. But with that being said, I'm going to end it off for today's video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day and evening. And as always, I'll be back with more tomorrow. See you then.